Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm your host, Lauren Duff, and today I'm joined by Petrina Suppler, Director of Legal Advocacy at Domestic Violence Services of Southwestern PA, and Michelle Cooper, the Technical Assistance and Education Manager at PCADV. So we are going to be talking about volunteers and intern engagement at local domestic violence programs. So for those interested in volunteering with your local domestic violence program, we'll talk about some of what those volunteer opportunities might look like and how you can get started getting involved. And for domestic violence service providers and other local programs with us today, we'll be getting into some of the innovative ways to recruit and engage with volunteers. And we'll have some updates from Michelle on JAR's training options for volunteers as well. So thank you both for joining us today and welcome to Ask an Advocate. I'd like to start first with you, Petrina. If you could tell us a little bit about Domestic Violence Services of Southwestern PA, what your role is there and what kind of services you provide for survivors.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Legal Advocacy. I'll start kind of with the overview of our agency. So DVSSP for short. We have a 24-hour hotline, of course, and we have two safe houses. We have one that's in Washington County and one in Fayette County. We serve three counties, Washington, Greene, and Fayette. Oftentimes our Greene clients will just go to Washington or Fayette counties if they need shelter services. We also have a prevention and outreach department that will go to the schools. Being at summertime right now, they go to a lot of the summer camps and they do a lot of prevention programs through those avenues. We have empowerment counseling. We have a mobile advocacy department that essentially their role is to try to provide a survivor with the same services that they would receive inside a safe house. They receive those services outside of the safe house. So if they need assistance with housing, or if they need assistance with just the counseling overall, the six session program, or if they need security cameras or something like that, they're able to help assist a survivor with a lot of resources that they may otherwise not know even exists. So we have therapeutic services. We have two therapists on staff that will meet with different survivors in the safe house, or when we get to legal advocacy, I can share what they do for our legal advocate survivors. We have a housing case management department that's pretty self-explanatory. They assist survivors in finding housing and assistance with housing needs, and even if there's funding available with furnishing the houses. And then down to legal advocacy, which is my favorite because it's my department. We have a legal advocacy office in Washington, and then one in Fayette and one in Greene. And we file the protection from abuse orders. We assist survivors going to many preliminary hearings and also to their protection from abuse hearings, whether it's the initial hearing or their final hearings. As far as our therapeutic staff, how they kind of play a role is sometimes survivors need a little bit of extra attention that the therapist can provide. So if there are needs in that area, then we've had therapists more than once come to court hearings to be present with a survivor.
That makes sense. That is a lot of different things that you offer and you provide for survivors. So given that you all do so much, what are some of the ways that community members can get involved with the things that you do for survivors or within the community on the prevention and education side?
So there are so many ways, as we've discussed, there are so many different things that our agency does. We have volunteers who do everything from helping us clean things up, to sorting gifts around Christmas time, to covering full shifts in our legal advocacy offices or our safe houses. So really it's wherever the volunteer, has a heart for wanting to volunteer at, to provide service. I generally make it a point to just sit down on a regular basis with different volunteers to find out if where they're at is somewhere where they're comfortable, or if they want to make a shift to a different area, even if it's just temporary, or just want to be exposed to something else. That's probably more prominent with our interns than some of our general volunteers.
And if somebody is interested in volunteering, what is the first step that they would take? How can they get started? Maybe they're not sure with all of those different options, what might be the best fit for them, or what the different time commitments are for different roles that they could play. So where would they get started?
So the first thing would be for them to call and get connected with, we have a lady by the name of Kelly Young, who takes a lot of the applications and does a lot of the coordinating. So the first step would be to contact her, and I have to pull up her phone number because I do not have it. So I do apologize for that. But while I'm pulling that up, I can share some other information. Once you contact Kelly, then she would send you an application. And with that application, we would be able to basically find the best fit for you. And also, just see if, obviously we have to do all the background checks for someone also, but we take some time to schedule them we do an interview with them, with any volunteer. So there would be an actual interview process that happens, just to try to screen out anyone who may be adverse to our overall goals. So, but the phone number that you would call is 724-223-5481, and it's extension 17. And she would, like I said, Kelly would be the first step, and she would get that application to you, and we can kind of go from there.
And we will make sure to get that phone number in the comments on the live broadcast, so that folks have that to reference as well. So how do you go about recruiting volunteers at your program?
So we do that through several different avenues. I'm going to talk in the more general, and then I'll kind of shift to some more trends that have kind of worked more recently. But so for any of our outreach events, we have like a volunteer sign up. If someone is interested, we put that information out. We have a lot of different things that go out through our social media pages. We have flyers that we hang up, at like the library, or different organizations that we may find typical volunteers seem to be at. One of the other places that we recruit is through the universities. Many students need internships. There's different levels of internships. There are, for instance, at the university nearest to the Greene County office, there are Bonner scholars who have to have a incredible amount of volunteer hours. So, for example, one of their requirements is they have to have 140 hours a semester plus 280 hours over 2 summers. So that's per summer. And then there's an optional third 280 that they can do. But what's been happening more recently is our volunteers are telling their friends. So our current Bonner scholar, who's been with us for 3 years and will be graduating this coming May, which we're so happy for her, but unfortunately she'll be departing. She has recruited 2 of her friends who are underclassmen that are both Bonner scholars. So more than likely she's going to be replaced by 2 people, which is just fantastic. And we've had some other people who just being within the agency have referred other people in to come and help volunteer. We've had several volunteer either become staff at some point or have been staff at some point. So those are probably the more specific ways that we end up recruiting volunteers.
But two follow-up questions that I want to ask about that, Petrina. And the first one is, how did you initially find out about the Scholars Program or get connected with that program in your area?
So I just started calling schools, although some of this predates me, especially the Bonner Scholar that had predated me, but I'm pretty sure prior to even me doing any work with DVSSP, that's how it started. Sometimes schools will contact us and just see if there's any their service sites, see if there's any opportunity for a student to have a service site. But I just started calling like schools that we didn't have relationships with. I just started calling them and asking them questions. Hey, who do I talk to? What forms do you need filled out? What are the requirements? What departments do you have? And just kind of getting all that information.
So really some good old fashioned relationship building
Yeah.
with the
Yes.
universities and colleges in your area.
And that, Lauren, actually segued into the online portal. So I'll just go ahead and kind of bring that up now. I'm not sure that
Yeah.
is anywhere else in our outline here, but so there are a couple different portal systems that the universities use. Handshake is probably the most popular, and that will, I believe we're going to have that in the chat for you. But Handshake allows you very, very easily. You can post the description, and we basically take our job description, make some edits, and it's very similar to what an intern would be doing anyway. So we just use that and we can post it on the Handshake. And what Handshake allows us to do is any college that's registered with them, like in a state or in a certain area, we can just a click of a button and hit them all. So it's not like we have to create separate postings for each. And there's different levels of activity on there. Sometimes we'll have individuals who have actually already graduated and they're really looking more for employment, but sometimes we'll have freshmen who are, just creating their new accounts, and we can try to reach out to them and, see where they may be interested in volunteering in the future. The biggest advantage to Handshake is for, aside from everything else I just mentioned, because I feel like those are already big advantages, but for an area like ours, and I don't know how many of you may be familiar with Greene County, Pennsylvania, but it's very small and very rural. So most of our students do not stay in Greene County for higher education. They'll be going to larger schools and larger areas, but they come back here. This is their home for their summer breaks. So using Handshake will allow you to reach students where they are. So whatever university they're at, you can have it posted. And if they're looking for an internship in their hometown, then they have the opportunity to find that and still go home and have their internship.
That's great. And that's such a good point, because I'm sure there's other areas that might not have a ton of universities or colleges to tap into. So making sure that you tap into the local students that might be going to school somewhere else while they're home on breaks is a really great idea. We had a question come in relating to recruitment. So the question was, where are the places in your community where you're hanging flyers and doing some of that in-person recruitment?
So our interns actually hang it all over the university, but all of our like libraries, grocery stores, sometimes the banks have bulletin boards that will allow us to hang it. Some of the different clubs like the Elks or VFW or some of those different, I'm trying to think, Civic Club maybe, some of those different organizations where people are already meeting, like we're trying to hit places where there's already going to be a group of people meeting. More recently, I didn't know it existed probably because I'm not in their demographic, but a retired teachers organization. So I have been trying real hard to, hey, let me come meet with you because, I feel like there's a lot of individuals there who still want to possibly do something. That may not otherwise be doing something. But I would say, places like that, you really have to kind of get creative with that. Churches are another place that we send our information to. And sometimes it really does take a lot of that old-fashioned content, or excuse me, contact, where you have to call and say, hey, this is information that I have. This is what we're looking for. Do you mind if I email it to you? As opposed to just, leaving something somewhere. That way they know. I have a pretty good relationship with a lot of different churches and the director of the library here. So, it helps, to have that stuff. So the more you can have those personal contacts, it makes it easier to get information out.
Great. So the other follow-up question from earlier that I had for you, Petrina, is you mentioned that your volunteers are referring the next round of volunteers. So I wanted to ask, what do you do to ensure that your volunteers have such a good experience to the point where they're recommending that their friends and fellow students come and join you? How are you making sure that that volunteer experience is worthwhile, that they're getting something out of it to the point where they want to send more people your way?
So I think it's kind of a bundled experience. So one of the things that I've tried to implement is treating volunteers very much the same way as I do staff. And when I had mentioned about, setting someone down and talking about their goals, like they really appreciate that, especially with the interns. They really appreciate having a voice in what their internship looks like and being able to shift back and forth. So I try to make things as inclusive as possible. One of the things that our agency does is an annual appreciation dinner, where we make it a point to recognize each volunteer. And we present them with generally a small gift for those who attend. This past year, I'm new in the director's position, so this was the first time I was able to participate in this capacity, but I was able to recognize each of the volunteers that I had at this dinner. And it just made me really proud to be able to do that, to be able to say to everyone in the room, and we include our board in this also because our board is volunteers. So I got to brag about everything that the volunteers were doing, to not only other volunteers, our staff is generally invited. Well, they're invited to it. So I got to, brag to everyone about what, the volunteers were doing at the sites that I oversee. One of the other things I do is, this is exclusive for my Bonner Scholar because she's here so much and she just does such an amazing job with being here. Like she's here all the time. She's probably in my office more than I'm in my office. Don't tell my boss that. But once a week I buy her lunch. And, that's not unheard of for a regular staff person, to purchase lunch. So, but, college is kind of rough. So once a week, we have lunch together for sure. But I buy her lunch once a week. And I don't know if that's why she referred her friends or just because the site and the experience is so great. But I think it's just such a big kind of package thing to be able to have so many different experiences with one agency.
Absolutely. Well, and even with the lunch, like not only is that like a free lunch, sure, but that's also additional time for her to like give feedback and build that relationship with you and like really feel a part of the organization, not just somebody who's there to stamp some out, like run some stuff through the mail machine and sort some paperwork, like somebody who really has a big stake and is building relationships with you all and really getting connected to the mission. So I think that's fantastic.
Well, and Lauren, as you mentioned those things, there are individuals who want to come in and they want to do more of the miscellaneous type tasks, like you had just mentioned. But there are others who come in and they don't want to do those things. They want to do things like, I want to learn how to file a protection from abuse order. I want to be trained to accompany clients to hearings. I want to learn how to conduct a empowerment counseling session so that I can do those. We do jail sessions also with our empowerment counseling. So we had one of the more recent volunteers that she hasn't been through JARS yet, but that's something that she's very interested in learning how to do is run those jail sessions so that she can do those in the future. So it really just kind of depends on, what the volunteer is interested in, but it's really important to be able to, tap into what that individual is really looking for with their volunteer time.
Absolutely. So it's really about making sure that the experience is customized for the individual volunteer and what they're hoping to get out of their engagement with you all.
Sure.
So have you had any obstacles or barriers in the past when it comes to recruiting volunteers or retaining volunteers? Or if you haven't personally, have you heard from other programs or other folks what some of their obstacles might be?
So, like I mentioned previously, I only recently took the director's position, and as I took it, I had 3 volunteers with internships starting at the same time on the same site. So I got a very much trial by fire of how am I going to make this work? And we kind of stumbled our way through a little bit, but having your training, at least your on-site training, the JARS is really, it is a different department. So when it comes to JARS training, the individual goes to our training person, I don't know her exact title, sorry. So they do their JARS training, but once they come on site, then there's a lot of on-site training that they have to do also to learn different software systems. So I very much had a trial by fire with that, like, how am I going to get all of these people trained? And then they had different schedules, this person coming this time, this time. So what I ended up doing was really cracking down on what this training plan is going to look like, pairing them up with some regular staff to work through teams, practicing certain things, even virtually with me. So I have an individual who works at a site that I just don't get to very often. So we generally meet weekly on Teams so that we can talk about any training, any issues, anything, vent about problems. But it gives us time to chat together. But really just having the training on point was a very important thing to overcome. For this particular office, because as I mentioned, the volunteer who's here she knows probably more than I do about this office, but she does the training here, which is really, really helpful. So just making sure that your training is really, really on point. I have checklists that we go through that, each individual has to go through all of these different things to learn before, they're able to be on their own or whatever. And that helps prompt a lot in the way of questions, if they're unsure about something, but really just having your training program on point is very, very important.
But while we're on the topic of training, we had a question come in through Facebook. Do you have your interns go through the full JARS training? Do you do it during the semester that they intern or prior? It's a lot of training to do in the semester as part of the internship yourself. So how do you manage that? And also I'll add to that, what training is required for various positions, and does that really vary? Does everybody need to have the full training, or does the amount of training and type of training that they need depend on the type of work that they want to do with you all?
Okay, so it does depend on what they're wanting to do. So any direct service volunteer, so anyone who's going to have any direct client service would need to take the full JARS training. If an individual is only looking to periodically help through outreach programs that they would not have direct client service, then they would not need JARS. Those are kind of the determining factors there. As far as their JARS training and when they actually do their internship, it's really up to the individual. What I've tried, like when I set up all my handshake postings more recently, and I have an individual who's looking at interning next summer, what I told her, I said, we can look at scheduling her JARS training during school break in December, between December and January. I said, we can, look at trying to get your JARS done then, so that when you start or when summer break starts, you won't have to worry about doing jars at that point. But oftentimes it's been one continuous flow. They'll do jars and then they come on site. It really depends on their internship. And I think that kind of goes back to what does that individual need and what can we do to adjust? Sometimes we can't adjust, sometimes we can. I had one in the spring that she was getting ready to graduate and she just, she needed a certain number of hours. So we just accommodated for her. But I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and we do have a follow-up question to that. And Michelle, this might be one for you, actually. How frequently throughout the calendar year do you offer the JARS training? So Petrina, your program, how often do you offer it? Michelle, do you have a sense of how often other programs are offering JARS? This particular person's having some trouble with trainees finishing the training. Any suggestions or strategies for that?
So we do it as needed. We don't have set calendar times. They generally coincide with our hiring needs also. So as we're looking to hire someone, then we tack on the volunteers so that they can be trained with the new hire staff. I can't remember what the other part of the question was.
Just strategies and suggestions for making sure that they finish their training.
So I remember what I was going to say. So as far as them finishing the training, we have allowed somewhat of a grace for certain individuals who need to take a little longer. And we had one that just had a whole bunch of life things happen at once. So we were able to extend, her training time so that she was able to finish. With that though, our training, they're meeting with our trainer on a regular basis. So there's not a whole lot in the way of opportunity for them to be off track that we would know because they're meeting. I don't know if it's once or twice a week. Like I said, unfortunately, that's not my department. But maybe Michelle has some other answers.
Yeah, I love the idea of having kind of a rolling onboarding process. I think that's been one of the most exciting shifts that I've seen since, coming to PCADV and taking on the JARS update is, when I started as an advocate, I worked for a dual program. So it was 73 hours of all in-person training. And it's interesting because I came in, I intended to do an internship and I couldn't because basically the training would have been my entire internship period. So I think with the update to our online learning center and the fact that now at PCADV 20 hours of that training is fully available online that folks can take at their convenience, that makes it a lot easier to sort of get that in-person training done a lot more quickly. So one of the strategies that many programs have started to initiate is when it's possible for volunteers, the first step in that process, while they're getting all of their clearances, while they're getting everything else done and ready, they can start taking their online learning center learning path curriculum and ideally have that pretty much complete by the time they are starting to come in for that in-person training. And I think too, historically programs used to do, twice a year. So, at the program that I came from, it was sort of like a spring and fall, where they would have these trainings and they would kind of promote them and stuff like that. But volunteerism has changed so much, even in the last 10 years. And then recently with the pandemic and things moving so much to virtual spaces, a lot of folks have really started to adapt to that and have been able to offer training on a smaller scale. So for new staff, as staff are hired, and then for volunteers, sort of as folks are able to come on board. And I think that's one of the most exciting things, like I said, is there's a lot more flexibility or potential for flexibility between more folks having a hybrid or virtual option for folks, and then also having the online learning center kind of broken out. And I think that if there are programs that haven't considered doing more of a rolling training, it's something to consider, and something that, on the training team between Michael Duffy and myself, we'd love to be able to talk about helping folks, adapt their training schedule if that's something that's helpful, because flexibility, I'm finding, and what I'm hearing from programs that are adopting it is really key, which is why I think, Petrina, what your volunteer program has been able to offer, especially with that, the handshake app. I think that's such a cool idea and a great way to really meet folks where they are.
Yeah, Michelle, can I backtrack just a tiny bit and have, for the folks that aren't with programs that might be watching us because they're interested in volunteering, can you just explain what JARS is? And maybe, I know Petrina touched on this a little bit, but like when volunteers need to do this more intensive training, and when volunteers can help out at a program without having to go through the full, I believe it's 40 hours of training that we do. And please correct me if I'm wrong about that.
No, you got it. So yeah, I would love to. So the JARS curriculum, JARS stands for Justice, Autonomy, Restoration, and Safety / Support, because safety is subjective. This is something that has been around as long as PCADV, and this curriculum is outlined in the PFA Act legislation, which is what gives domestic violence advocates their confidentiality privilege in the state of Pennsylvania. So PCADV, as the funding organization, part of PCADV membership includes, the provision of that 40 hours of training. So all of our member programs are able to provide that 40 hours of training. PCADV is able to monitor the completion of that and provide technical assistance, training updates, and resources. And we are the ones that create and update that training to make sure that all of our advocates, volunteers, anybody who's sort of working for or associated with the program doing direct service has 40 hours of training that's been really approved by the state as being updated, and what they need to be able to provide the most trauma-informed services to survivors of domestic violence. So as Petrina said, anyone in a program who will be working with survivors directly, whether that's volunteering in a shelter or residential space, answering hotline, or even just being in a position where they may interact with survivors. So we have some folks that may not really be doing a lot of direct service, but will still, have the potential to interact with a survivor, answer questions from a survivor. Anyone that has that potential for face-to-face interaction needs to complete that 40 hours of training, including all actual staff in the program. So as Petrina pointed out, there are some volunteer situations that don't require that, folks that will just be doing, odds and ends, as I think most people like to call it, filing, office work, the folks that go out into the community and hang those flyers for folks to find, those are all, things that don't necessarily require the 40 hours of training. But it is best practice for anybody that's associated with the program to have, as Petrina pointed out, some kind of onboarding so that they're prepared to answer questions and prepared to, understand the mission and vision of the program and movement and all of that. But even if somebody is not doing direct service, there's requirements for on-site, interaction and things like that. So every program has really specific guidelines about what folks need to do, and really maintaining the confidentiality and privacy of folks, that they engage with, even if it's not survivors when they're in a program. So if anybody's listening that isn't familiar with program and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much stuff to have to do and remember, I want to ensure that folks don't walk away from this thinking like, man, I thought I wanted to volunteer for a domestic violence program, but now, one of the things that's really awesome and exciting about the way that these, training curriculums are set up and the way that our programs are set up is that all of this is really done in a way that's accessible. So while it sounds like a lot and it sounds like a lot of responsibility, it's sort of rolled out in a way that's really accessible for folks. And in my experience, folks that go through any kind of training at program leave feeling, better for it. I don't know anybody that kind of gets through the training and they're like, oh man, that was a waste of 40 hours. Like no matter where you go or what you do, it's training that that really is, not just for interaction with survivors of domestic violence, although obviously that's a big part of it, but it's also just about trauma-informed care, self-care practices, and all of the things that really help advocates and folks in human services thrive in this work rather than getting, overwhelmed and burned out. So don't be discouraged if it sounds like a lot. It's worth it. And as Petrina said, a lot of programs like hers are really willing to work with folks to make it an achievable, an achievable training.
Yeah, and I would just give I'm of course a little bit biased, but I would give a quick plug for our Training Institute folks. They've been working really hard to update a lot of the trainings, and now the online portion is so much more engaging and it goes so much more quickly because it's just really they do a great job of making it more interactive and fun and engaging, and I think also then easier to remember and really absorb all the information. So it's not the jars of the before. It is constantly, it's continually being updated by our fantastic e-learning team to make it as fun and engaging as possible too. So
yeah, I will second that, Lauren. We've come a long way in our curriculum development with more to come. So, if you are a program person that hasn't had a chance to check out the online learning center updates, we really are working and committed to adult education styles and creating content that really allows for engagement and learning that's going to stay with you. It's not just death by PowerPoint, as we like to call it. There's a lot of engaging activities and things that really allow you to build off of those skills that you learn once you get to your in-person skill development. So hats off to the Training Institute because they're an amazing team.
absolutely. Petrina, what are some of the other qualifications or background requirements that you have for people that might want to volunteer, whether that's for the direct service where they're going to be interacting with survivors, or for some of the other volunteer opportunities that don't require the intensive training?
So as I mentioned before, that we do the required background checks. So the fingerprinting, the FBI background check, and the criminal background check. We have on the application, it asks for references. So we contact 3 references, good character references. And then during the interview process, we have just several different questions, asking about an individual's perspective on domestic violence and their any prior knowledge that they have. I will say one of the barriers for someone to be a volunteer is, and I believe it's 2 years. They need to be at least 2 years removed from any personal domestic violence situations. But other than that, I mean, that's pretty much how the screening process works as far as, bringing volunteers on board.
Is that across the board, or is that, and Michelle, this might be a question for you, is that across the board a requirement, or is that something specific to DVSSP?
Nope, that's not across the board. Every program, I think has their own guidelines for what works best for them, but that's not a PCADV standard. Some folks, feel like they want to make sure that folks are in a good space to be able to engage.
Right.
But, generally speaking, we try to make sure that there's opportunities for survivors to engage in this work whenever they are called to do it.
Petrina, you also mentioned that some of your volunteers are former staff or like people that have been involved with you before. So if somebody has already taken the training in the past or has experience working at your program or another domestic violence program, whether in Pennsylvania or other state, do they have to retake the training when they want to become a volunteer? Or is that something that carries over if they've had that previously somewhere else?
I think it would probably, as far as a former employee of DVSSP, I think it would depend on how much time had lapsed. But if they're, transitioning probably within 6 months, I think it might end up being on a case-by-case basis, but, within 6 months or a year, then I can't imagine there would be any issue with just transitioning them into the volunteer program. We actually, the former person in my shoes is now a volunteer. So I recruited her back. I'm just gonna say. Like, you have to. But she, like, her thing is she just wants to do events. She doesn't want to come in and file any more PFAs. But as far as someone coming from another program, I think it would probably depend. If it was a PCADV approved program, then they may not have to do it again. But I think it would probably, again, be on a case-by-case basis. But I thought this might be a good opportunity. We do require volunteers to have 8 hours. I think this is a PCADV requirement also. Yeah, Michelle's nodding her head. They do have to have 8 hours of training annually also. So sometimes we do some of that training together, or as I find different things that I think may interest either this volunteer or that one or the group, I just kind of shoot it over to them in an email so that they can, have those required hours.
Yeah, thank you, Petrina, because that was exactly what I was going to say, is that, we typically, because there's that 8-hour requirement for continued certification. So you'll do your JARS training, you'll get your 40 hours, you'll get your little certificate of completion. But then in order to maintain that, everyone, who gets that certification needs to have those 8 hours of continuing education annually. So to Petrina's point, if it's somebody that's kind of, moving from one program to another, most of the time there's not a real big issue. But if there's been a gap of a year or more, then usually, unless there's, an extenuating circumstance that, that we might be able to work through, most people will need to take that 40 hours of certification again. And this is something too, I want to uplift our monitoring team, because these are things that Nikita and Cindy are able to, to kind of talk through with folks and be able to give recommendations that will make sure that folks that are coming in, if there's been a gap in service or if they're transitioning from another program, just to ensure that everything is, is on track, and that there are no surprises waiting for you when monitoring comes out. But our usual best practices, to make sure that they've been able to maintain those 8 hours of ongoing continuing education to keep that certification current.
Thanks, Michelle. So my final question for you today, Petrina, is what advice would you give to other advocates or DV programs that are hoping to engage more volunteers at their program?
I would say I completely understand that sometimes it is difficult to get a volunteer, but when you have a volunteer's attention, make it a point to maintain that relationship. And even the lady who just recently retired, aside from the fact that I do consider her a friend, but I made it a point to call her and just talk to her and say, hey, are you still wanting to volunteer? And, here's some upcoming events. I know one of them happens to be her favorite. So, here's some upcoming events, that you can help participate in if you want, but really just keeping that relationship with them. I feel like oftentimes, and I don't think anyone does it maliciously, but we take advantage of the technology sometimes to a fault, and we send our emails and text messages and we miss some of that personal touch. It is so, I will tell you, it is so much easier sending one group email or one group text to 10 people than it is to send 10 separate messages. However, if you send 10 separate messages, you have a much higher rate of response than if you send that group text. So just staying in communication. And if someone's not responding, reach out to them, find out what their situation is. Maybe they're going through something, maybe it's just a time that they have to step back, or it might be something that they might have even been confused and they were afraid to ask because it's a group text or whatever. So, but just keeping that communication with your volunteers.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today and taking the time. I know everybody at programs are so busy right now. So I just really appreciate you giving your time to talk with us and hopefully to inspire some folks to volunteer and to help with some helpful advice for other programs. And if you are listening right now and you're with a program and you have any questions, or in the future, you want to get some advice on volunteer engagement, please reach out to our TA and education team. They are going to be more than willing to help you figure out training needs or refresh you on some of the things we talked about today with Petrina on what some other programs are doing to really successfully engage, recruit, and retain volunteers. So I encourage you to reach out to Michelle and her team. And if you're listening right now and you're a volunteer potentially, and you're thinking you might want to get involved with your local program, please go to PCADV's website, pcadv.org, and go to the program locator and look up your local program and visit their website or give them a call. Every program is going to have a little bit of a different intake process. So I encourage you to find the program in your community and reach out to them to get started and find out what the volunteer opportunities are. So thank you again so much. And
thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Petrina.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.